Here is a look at Beirut this morning, where the search for survivors continues in the port area after that devastating explosion on Tuesday. At least 175 people are dead. Dozens others remain missing. Lebanon's prime minister is promising people in the country that those to blame will face the consequences. A number of port officials are now under house arrest, and there's still no official word on the cause. Negligence the focus, though, for investigators. More than 2,700 tons of highly explosive ammonium nitrate had been in a warehouse in the port for years. So for more on all of this, let's bring back Laura McQuillan. Laura, walk us through some of the details that we're learning.
Well, interestingly, John, you mentioned negligence there, and actually the finger is being pointed at officials, government officials and the judiciary in terms of that. But let me take you back, because you need to go back to 2013 to really understand what's gone on here. That is when a Russian ship sailed into Beirut's port. It was destined for Mozambique, carrying all of that ammonium nitrate. It was set to become commercial explosives in Mozambique, but had to make an emergency stop in Lebanon. Now, it was actually impounded because it was deemed unseaworthy. You're looking at the ship on your screen at the moment. Its crew was held on board the ship for a year, and then they were freed the following year, but that ammonium nitrate was confiscated, put in that warehouse on the port where it did explode just days ago. Now, going back to 2014, we know that there were at least 6 warnings from Lebanese customs officials to the country's courts, which had imposed the order that that ammonium nitrate must remain in the warehouses. They'd said, how can we dispose of this? They'd suggested giving it to the Lebanese military or selling it to a private company. Records now suggesting the courts never responded to any of those requests for help there. Described back in 2014 by the former captain, John, as a floating bomb. That's how many concerns there were about what was on board that ship. And even just 6 months ago, when this was last inspected, there was a warning from those inspectors that the ammonium nitrate could, quote, blow up all of Beirut if not moved. So years and years of warnings not heeded by officials, and a lot of scrutiny now over who knew what and why they didn't act.
So Laura, what does all of this mean for the Lebanese government?
Well, it is already facing a lot of trouble. The country economically collapsing. It is under a lot of pressure over things like corruption, conflict, of course, decades of that, and now COVID-19 putting even more strain on an already very strained country. A dire situation right now. There are warnings of a total collapse or a public uprising over this disaster. We spoke to one expert about what might happen.
The main issue is that for 6 years, almost all the responsible of the Lebanese government, security services, the port authority were aware about the presence of a ticking bomb in the middle of Beirut, a huge bomb in the middle of Beirut, and they didn't take any action. They did a lot of, I would say, paperwork to cover themselves, but no one took an action to protect the population.
And that is exactly what a lot of Lebanese people are saying on social media, what local media is reporting as well, that anger now directed at the government responding. Its economy minister speaking to CBC Radio's As It Happened, he said, As It Happens rather, he said that the blame for this needs to lie with successive governments, but he does say there has to be a stiff penalty here. Here is what he told CBC.
It is certainly incompetence. It is certainly as well people not understanding and assessing the risks. It is bureaucracy and frankly, in my opinion, stupid behaviors and decisions. And it is criminal negligence from a lot of people. Whoever was responsible since 2014 until now will have to be brought to court, and really sanctions should be very hard.
And the government has ordered house arrest for a number of port officials. Port officials having said that they've been giving warnings of this for years, John. So some concern and certainly a lot of outrage from the public. They do not want there to be any scapegoating here. They want that pressure on the government to continue till they get answers over what went wrong and why.
Thanks for this, Laura. Well, for more on the explosion in Beirut, we're joined now by Chris Hunter. He's an explosions expert and bomb disposal operator, and he's been watching videos of what happened. Chris joins us now from Hay-on-Wye in Wales. Thanks for your time, sir. Really appreciate it. We've learned that nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate caused the explosion. Seeing what you've seen, examining the video with your background, what did you think?
Well, certainly, I'm aware that the United States president yesterday suggested it was an attack. There's nothing to suggest that was the case. I'm both a counterterrorism specialist and a bomb technician, including an investigator. And what was very clear, as you look at the initial sort of footage, you see the grey plume of smoke, a large cloud, and a raging fire taking place, lots of flashes and sparks, which is consistent with the storage of fireworks and the storage of potential ammunition, such as that used in handguns and rifles and the like. And then as that cooked off, we know that there was ammonium nitrate fertilizer being stored, co-located, and as you mentioned in the previous report, a significant amount of it. And ammonium nitrate, is used agriculturally, very innocuously. But of course, as soon as you heat it up, with a really high temperature flame, if it's in sufficient quantities and the conditions are correct, then you can cause it to actually burn to detonation, which is exactly what we saw. And then the subsequent blast wave traveling out, all of the associated damage with that.
Yeah, and we've been showing viewers some of the many videos that were taken at that moment when the explosion occurred. But this is a situation where ammonium nitrate, for example, in Canada, very tight restrictions with inspections and specifics around the type of facility it should be stored in. So moving something like that in that quantity to a warehouse, what kind of situation does that create?
Well, I think first and foremost, John, the movement of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, as you said, it's pretty much restricted, and it's certainly monitored. But it does travel all around the world, and usually by sea freight. Consignments of this quantity, 2.75 thousand tons, isn't unusual. But what we do know is that the vessel, a Moldovan flag vessel, had technical difficulties. As a result, it was considered unseaworthy. After a period of time, it was determined the cargo was potentially hazardous on board. But then the really unusual decision that really, defies common sense and logic, to move it into the port area, which is surrounded, as you can see, and as everybody knows, by, residences, commercial and domestic dwellings. That was a really unusual decision to make. Now, it's not dangerous in its raw state, of course, but when you've got an industrial port, when you've got it stored next to a fireworks storage facility, and the potential, of course, for fires, then it really should never have been there for that amount of time. It should very immediately really have been moved and either destroyed or been recycled, if you like, and sent out for agricultural use.
As you say, it is common because agriculture is common all over the world, and the need for fertilizer is ubiquitous. So it begs the question, how many other stores like this, how many other ticking time bombs are sitting on ports and warehouses and storage facilities around the world?
I think the answer is there are multiple locations where there are significant quantities of ammonium nitrate fertilizer. The difference is they're not sitting there for years and years on end, baking in the sun, drying out, and nor are they co-located next to dangerous, flammable, and indeed explosive storage facilities. I think there was a comedy of errors, a series of faults at stake here, and a series of coincidences as well, that all combined to create this devastating and horrific incident. But I don't think it's something we need to worry about, as a general rule of thumb. But of course, it just goes to show that negligence will certainly cause something catastrophic if those other factors come into play.
Just to help our viewers understand the magnitude of this, comparisons have been made, of course, to the Oklahoma City bombing, and the aspect there that what we're seeing in Lebanon was effectively 2,000 times that. As well, in Canada, we have over 100 years ago, the Halifax explosion, where a vessel with munitions caught fire. And it is, as I understand it, about the same magnitude of explosion. Can you talk about an explosion like this going off and the way, as we've seen, the blast carrying in terms of its destruction and even the smashing of windows going on for kilometers away?
Sure. I mean, the Halifax was one of the most significant explosive accidents in history. And this was significantly higher. In the 30 years that I've been a bomb technician or involved in the explosives world, This is certainly the most significant incident I've ever seen outside of a military test. To put it into context, 2.75 kilotons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer is the equivalent. We use TNT as the sort of equivalent for explosives. It's the equivalent of a 1 kiloton TNT device, which is the same as a tactical battlefield nuclear weapon in that sort of context. So what you would see is at the point of detonation, a rapid expansion of gas, heat, light and pressure traveling out radially in all directions. Because there was hard standing underneath it, you would see it like a hemisphere, which was the big white cloud that we saw, which then turns into a mushroom cloud above it. And traveling outwards, you get this blast wave which compresses the air, and it causes a sort of wall of concrete, and it smashes against everything in its path. Those blast waves are also reflected off other buildings and other structures, so they sort of actually come back and converge on each other as well, causing even greater damage. And that's just on the structures. Most structures are designed for wind loading and static loading, gravity, something like that. So as the blast wave travels out and upwards, it displaces floors, it displaces masonry, balconies, that sort of thing. And then as it pushes it up, it then comes back down again and becomes dislodged, and you get building collapse and catastrophic failure. And then you've got the blast injuries on the humans as well. So it's really significant.
So anyone, if I understand what you're saying, within that blast, unless they were somehow protected or sheltered, wouldn't really have stood any kind of a chance of survival.
We look at it in terms of the size of the explosive charge, and we look at it in terms of, effectively severe, moderate and light damage. And, anything really within a, 1 kilometre, half a mile range, it's total destruction. Out to sort of 8 kilometres where, you might get some glazing damage, but not necessarily people being injured by the glass unless they were out on the street and it was to collapse. And closer, 1 mile, 2 miles, then you still get significant injuries and structural damage as well. So it just depends on how close you were. One thing we did notice though, you'll see the grain silo that was in the imagery, which was obviously heavily damaged. That actually acted as a blast wall. So some of the blast was deflected upwards rather than into the city. So at least, a part of the city, there would be a reduction in the damage.
Chris, you've painted a frightening picture of what happened, but you've really helped us understand more of what did happen. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.